Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Planning for Seniors Housing in Changing Cities Conference. I'm Sander Hitzig, and I'm one of the members of the Planning Committee. I'm so glad that all of you could join us here today. We're glad that you've taken the time to have these discussions and learn about cross-national exchange on seniors housing. I'm very happy to say that we have a diverse group of passionate seniors housing experts from Canada and the United States joining us today. This includes researchers, policymakers, housing community practitioners, students and trainees, and older adults with lived experience. I know that this is going to be a rich and dynamic learning opportunity for us to come together and learn about cross-national perspectives on aging and housing. Sorry, just give me 1 second. So before starting, I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. We acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call these lands home. So this is what we will do in Canada, and because we have a number of people from the States, we'd like to do one as well. This is the Wayne State University acknowledgement. And Wayne State University rests on Wawi-Tanong, also referred to as Detroit, the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Three Fires Confederacy. And I apologize, I thought my camera was on. These sovereign lands were granted by the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Wyandot nations in 1807. Through the Treaty of Detroit, Wayne State University affirms Indigenous sovereignty and honors all tribes with a connection to Detroit. So, before we begin, I know that navigating this virtual world can be a little bit tricky and a little overwhelming at times. So I do want to highlight a few things about the conference platform, Remo, that we're all on today. Just very quickly, if hopefully you're on Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox, because that will be the best browser for the Remo experience. And as well, only desktop computers or laptops can be used to access Remo. And to optimize your connectivity, you should disable your workplace firewall or VPN. And if you're not sure if you have one of those, then you probably don't. We're very fortunate. We have wonderful tech people here today to support us. And I'm going to turn it over to UHN Conference Services now, who are running this event for us, and they'll play a quick video to help you better understand Remo.
Welcome to the platform. In the next few minutes, we're going to go
So I'm back. I hope that video was helpful. And if there's any issues that do come up, again, we have great technical support today. There's Cmhc, Christian Peterson, Nancy Law, and Michael Johnson. They're all around here to hopefully help you navigate, and they're here to support any questions that you may have. And just for some additional orientation, this is the actual floor plan of the today. And just to point out a few things, on the bottom, you're going to see some blue buttons. So if you have questions about the agenda for today, you can click on the program. There's a whole bunch of information in the documents. Later, we're going to be asking for a conference evaluation form that you guys can find here, and it will also be broadcast later on. If you're interested in seeing the posters, there's the button there. So all the information around the conference is on the bottom. If you're having, again, challenges finding it, you can click in between the white spots to move up and down. And then on the sides is where our concurrent sessions are going to happen. So later on in this agenda, if you're looking for a particular talk, you can click on one of these to find those talks. So again, you know, it'll get some getting used to, but I'm sure we'll all figure it out. Sorry. Even I'm having some technical challenges. So with the speaker permission, presentation slides and other resources will be made available on the conference website, hopefully within 1 week of the event. We will send out an email notification when those materials are posted. Conference evaluations, like I said, will be done via an online survey, which you can either access through one of the buttons that I showed in the previous slide. And then you can click on that link and fill out the survey. We are asking that you do complete it because we love to hear your thoughts on the event. And for people who complete the survey by this Friday, May 14th by 6 p.m., we are going to, Friday, May 14th, if you choose to enter your name and email, you can be entered into a draw for one of 4 $25 gift cards. And then the other thing is that by attending this conference, we will be sending you a certificate of attendance. I do want to acknowledge that this event is being sponsored by a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada Connection grant. So because of their generous funding, this event was possible. I also want to acknowledge all the fantastic support of the partners who are supporting this event today, and we're fortunate we have representatives from them who will be speaking over the next 2 days. I do want to acknowledge the Scientific Planning Committee. This has been a long couple of months of planning, and it's been a great US-Canadian collaborative from coast to coast with people from Wayne State, Tam Perry, Yassir Mahmood, University of Victoria, Denise Kluche, Karen Kobayashi, and some great volunteer and support from Emma Helflin-Green from the City of Toronto. I do want to highlight Christine Shepard, who's my postdoctoral fellow, who's really been the leader and really moving this event along. So I really want to give her a high level of props for all the time and hard work that she's been putting into that. But the whole committee has been great, and it's been a fantastic experience working with all of them. I also want to highlight that we are organizing a special section in the Journal of Gerontological Social Work on understanding contemporary issues in seniors housing. So if there's anything that you may want to submit for publication in this area, please keep this in mind. And the deadline for submissions is December 15th of this year. Again, you can click on the bottom of the screen to learn more about this, and we'll bring it up again. And finally, for students or even people who are early in their career, we have organized a mentorship session for tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. It's happening between 5 and 6, so emails and other information should have been sent out. But if you haven't heard of this and you're interested, please reach out to Christine Shepard through the chat, and she can forward along that information. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Laura Tamlin-Watts, who will be giving the opening remarks. Laura Tamlin-Watts is the CEO of Cmhc, Canada's national seniors advocacy organization that works to improve the lives of older adults through advocacy, policy, and community engagement. Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi there, Laura. I believe I just re-gave you permission to get on stage. You should just have to turn on your camera and mic to join us.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Sander, for your very generous greeting. I am coming to you from Nova Scotia today, and I wanted to acknowledge that I am on the Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we acknowledge the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. I am Laura Tamlin Watts, CEO of CanAge, which is Canada's national seniors advocacy organization. For our American colleagues joining today, to put it in context, we work very closely with our cousin organization, the AARP. And we are so delighted to open today. So I'm going to do it traditionally. I'm going to say, bonjour tout le monde, welcomes. And for my American colleagues, greetings, y'all. We know how important it is to have the conversation about seniors housing. And I'm so delighted to be able to kick off this engaging and interesting discussion to help to provide some really positive solutions for issues that we've been talking about for decades. Today, we're bringing together older adults, tenants, housing providers, managers, seniors organizations, researchers, policymakers, government officials to have this critical conversation at a time which is more needful than ever. This conversation is international, it is interdisciplinary, it is intersectional. We're talking the ins and outs of housing, but also the impacts of precarity, community, health, civil rights, and social inclusion. We're here to bring together ideas and share opportunities and to problem solve some of these issues, but this time we're having the context as well of COVID-19. We always knew that seniors housing was important. We always knew that low-income housing was important. We always knew that aging in place and supportive housing was important. But never has the spotlight shone so brightly on the need for safe, engaged housing with community members helping to support and include us. Never before have we seen how precarity can lead to illness and death. Never so specifically have we seen how community, when it comes together, can help engage, keep, retain, and make people and families healthier, and that the opposite is true as well. We have seen the importance of making sure that we have policies which prioritize stability in housing. We have seen how important it is to have community-based organizations on the ground working both horizontally and vertically to make sure that we don't just have a safe roof to live under, but we have an engaged community to thrive within. This next little while is our opportunity, and I'm going to encourage you to tell the stories, to make sure that we're understanding what it means now in the time of COVID-19, and sadly, I think in the future of COVID-19 as well. To understand how this normative shift in this last year may need to make differences in how we think about housing, how we think about aging in place, how we think about housing preservation, the importance and impacts of managing around rent evictions. We're going to be wrestling with what investment means, financial investment, social investment. We're going to be talking about how public health engagement and housing either work together or fail miserably. We're going to be talking about it intersectionally around equity and diversity. I encourage you to share the stories of resilience, the stories in particular of our low-income renters or our low-asset seniors, and for people who have come together to try to problem solve at that level. We know that this conversation, it was critically important before COVID-19, but it is so much more important now. So in conclusion, our forward thinking is critically important, and the desire to age in place has never before been such a real and profound and tangible need. But we do know that austerity is going to come, that the dollars that have been flowing to support individuals and support communities won't last forever. So the issues that we wrestle with now and the inspiration that we derive from each other needs to be thought of not only in this time of relative social supports, but for when those social supports may get rolled back. You are the answer to this challenge, and I'm so grateful to be here as part of the community to engage and help kick it off. Have a wonderful conference, everyone.
Thank you, Laura. Words of inspiration and definitely very timely in terms of where we are in the world today with the pandemic. But hopefully today is a day to drive inspiration and creativity to figure out how to deal with the problems that may come up down the road. So at this point, I'm pleased to announce our keynote speakers. Before I give the formal introductions, I just wanted to flag that on the side, we have a chat and a Q&A chat as well. So if there's questions that come up for our speakers, please try and put them in the Q&A. And then that's easier for us to see the questions that are coming through. At this point, I'd like to introduce our keynote address, Changing Perspectives on Aging and Housing. And joining us today are Arlene Etchen and Linda Couch. Arlene is a consultant in the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's Partnerships and Promotions team, located in Toronto, Ontario. And Linda Couch is the Vice President of Housing Policy for Leading Age, which is located in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Arlene and Linda. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Terrific. And I will start off. Thank you, Sander. It is a pleasure to be here. And I know, Michael, thank you for running the slides, Michael, and you can move to the next slide already. So this slide is a picture of the Honorable John Lewis, a former congressman and civil rights leader. This is Mr. Lewis approaching his childhood home not long before Mr. Lewis passed away a couple of years ago. And in Mr. Lewis's autobiography, Walking in the Wind, he tells a story about a hurricane that came around when he was a child. And he was at the house of his Aunt Geneva with 14 of his young cousins in a house that looked probably pretty similar to this house. And a hurricane was coming, the roof started rattling, the walls were shaking, and then the floorboards started to pull up. And Aunt Geneva directed the children, she said, clasp hands, hold each other's hands real tightly, and stay together. And when the floorboards started to rise up in one corner of the home, Aunt Geneva directed all of them to go to one corner. And then the hurricane intensified and another corner of the home started to rise up from underneath. And Aunt Geneva, she said, everyone over there now, we got to keep that corner down now. And throughout the hurricane, the children and their aunt continued to hold hands, shifted from corner to corner, and not only did the family survive the hurricane, but the house survived as well. And John Lewis used this story as a metaphor for the civil rights movement. He said that you must never leave the house, that we must try and create one house, the house of the American family, he said. And I use this as a metaphor today to really think about together, especially as we, launch into this journey of this amazing conference, that wherever problems arise, we go there together to address them, and we stand together to fix them. And it's this philosophy that drives Leading Age's policy work for more and for better affordable senior housing. As I'm sure you all understand, there is a large and growing group of older adults in the United States who lack affordable housing. The lowest income older adults fare the worst. For affordability, and by that in the US, we mean paying less than 30% of your household's income on your housing costs. The lower your income is, the more likely you are choosing between rent and food and medicine. And the ranks of low-income older adults are expanding. Next slide, please. In the US, we have older adult haves and have-nots. And when we look at the resources people have after age 65, resources that give them choice in where they live and what services they will have access to, we initially see a really bright line between homeowners and renters. And in this chart, you will see this bright line. And this is the massive wealth gap for those 65 and older, even for those households with similar incomes. And on this chart, in the right-hand column, you'll see household net wealth by income quartiles for 65 plus households. And you'll see this wealth gap for 65 plus households for homeowners and then for renters. These are massive gaps that persist even for households in the same income quartile. And so you'll see in the yellow highlight on the right, for the lowest income quartile, so the lowest 25% of income households, that homeowners have an average net wealth of around $104,000, and renters in the same income quartile with an average net wealth of only $1,100. So I think that these numbers are really starking, and they tell their own story about the haves and have-nots of older adults in this country. But I also want to say that this is much more than an owner versus renter wealth gap. This slide really is sort of a billboard that starkly shows the results of a racist history of U.S. housing policy. A policy history where home ownership loans were allowed for certain races with certain terms in certain areas. To put it mildly, Black households did not get the best terms, were not allowed to live in the best areas, and did not even have similar access to opportunities. Next slide, please. And all of that history really shows up in this severe Black-white home ownership gap that exists in the US today, where we have a Black home ownership rate of 40% and a white home ownership rate of 76%. So among other disparities, in educational and job opportunities, for example, this gap eventually results in this disproportionate share of those low wealth 65 plus renters being non-white. And this is all to say that as we work diligently to expand the supply of affordable housing, which is Leading Age's #1 goal, and to preserve the affordable housing that we have and to make sure it's all connected to the services older adults need as they age in community, we've got to pay attention to who's allowed into the home ownership space, what those subsidies are, if the homes people are being assisted into buying are in the neighborhoods where that equity, that net wealth that they're going to need as they age can be developed. Next slide, please. So as Leading Age lobbies Congress and the White House for this more housing, to preserve the housing we have, and to connect to services, we have some pretty compelling arguments in the US, but we also have competing injustices. And I think it's important to understand that we make our case for affordable senior housing in a really pretty crowded environment of needs. And so I want to talk about 3 things that we use when we do our policy or lobbying work in DC to try to expand the pie, preserve the housing, and connect it all to services. And I would say the first thing that we need is that, any advocate has to rely on is patience, right? Things take time, and it can take years to bring solutions into law. For example, a bill I began working on in 2004 with many others became law in 2016, 12 years later, and still many parts of the original proposals and draft bills and real bills that we were working on were never included in the final bill. In COVID time, laws have moved much more quickly and resources have flowed much more rapidly, but still often not quite quickly enough. So I would say patience is something that we really have to bring to the work that we have. Second is a passion. And it's not something that I talk a lot about in my work, but I thought I would share with you all today is that, we really do have to think about and remember and tell ourselves, why are we doing this work? We each come to housing work in our own way. Maybe it was an article, maybe it was some convincing research, a class we took, an acquaintance, or maybe it's a personal connection. For me, I moved 8 times before I entered 8th grade, and I experienced firsthand relatives with no running water, no electricity, no next paycheck coming in. And the research, and there is a lot of it, on the physical and mental toll that poverty takes on you, that takes over you, is really very personal to me. And I even find I have to be in the right frame of mind to read that research, because it is my history, it is my mother's history, and it is so many people's history that we are still, working as a country to address poverty-related issues. And I would really recommend, as if you're figuring out like where your passion comes from, and you sort of know you have a job, but you're trying to figure out, or you want to be in the field. I always tell people I meet with who are looking for, job advice and career advice. I tell them, if you've not yourself experienced poverty on your own, or you haven't had the privilege to work or have worked directly with very poor people, I strongly encourage folks to do that. To really get a sense of where people are coming from and what they are up against. People often ask me, because I've been in the housing policy field for a while, say, how do you keep doing that? How do you keep asking for more? How do you keep asking for something that seems, so hard to achieve, that so many have written off as a pipe dream, asking for a lot, to get an adequate supply of affordable housing? How do you even dream of asking for an entitlement to housing assistance? And my first thought is of the struggle of being poor, and that nothing is harder than that. So I can certainly take on this role, and that's the kind of passion that I bring to this. And people all have their own stories, but I think in addition to patience, passion is a key ingredient that keeps people moving forward. And thirdly, I'd say, and these, I'm not a poet at all, but these all happen to be P words. And the third thought I had was persistence. And this is different than patience. This is this doggedness, right? The relentlessness of the ask, being confident in what you know. But it's also about being an ambassador, right? An educator. We want everyone to be a houser. It's a proselytizer, right? Like we've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? We want everyone to understand the foundational ability of housing. But it's also a respect and a camaraderie for our social justice peers. The world is full of really important issues. We have hunger, cancer, war, disasters. We have no shortage of tragedies and failings. But I think that part of our persistence and keeping our eyes on the prize is understanding that this is not a competition among other social justice issues, that the pie needs to be bigger, and that you never choose, because you never want to choose one failing or tragedy over another that needs to be solved. In affordable housing itself, there are many tragedies, of course. In the United States, more than 1.9 million older adult renter households are spending more than half of their very low income incomes on their housing costs. And research from Harvard shows that the poorest seniors, spending more than half of their incomes on housing costs, are also spending half as much on food and half as much on medicine as their non-housing cost burden peers. In the United States, for every one senior with housing assistance, there are 3 other seniors who are eligible for it, but don't receive it because the programs are too small. A really basic thing to understand is that in the U.S., housing is not an entitlement. Certainly just because you're eligible for it does not mean you receive it. Homelessness is on the rise among older adults in the U.S. It is rising much faster than even the nation is aging. And really, it's hard to talk about affordable housing for seniors without talking about accessibility features. And I just want to mention that in the United States, another tragedy just within the affordable housing world is that less than 1% of homes across the United States have even the most basic accessibility features. So a widened doorway, a single floor living, levers on the door so you can open them yourselves, those kind of things. But we push on and we work as hard as we can to make progress. Last year, our national housing agency, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, announced the very first round of new funding awards for its flagship affordable senior housing program in almost 10 years. And there were 18 awards announced. We were so thrilled with them. Those 18 awards will eventually build 575 deeply affordable apartment homes. And we fought for those dollars like mad with others, and we really celebrate them. But then it's hard not to sort of start to whisper and acknowledge what a tiny step that is and how much further we have to go. So again, it's the patience and the passion and the persistence that have to come, and you just have to keep pushing and really keep your eyes on the goal here. In the United States, we have a system of public, of quasi-public, of nonprofit organizations, and also of for-profit investors who are incentivized either by their regulators or by the tax system to build and preserve affordable housing in the US. And the level of sophistication of these organizations is amazing. Because resources to build affordable housing are so scarce, it is not uncommon for maybe 5 or 8 or 12 sources of funds to be within each new development. And they each have their own requirements and terms and compliance standards that come to that new apartment building. And certainly Leading Age knows, because this is who our members are, that when it comes to affordable senior housing, nonprofit organizations, NGOs have put aging and community first, have put dignity first, and have put choice and independence first. But who pays for that and the level of funding can drive the ultimate project. So we're constantly lobbying for more straightforward affordable housing funds that really are we just want the 2 basic buckets of funds. We first, organizations obviously, in an ideal world, will just get a grant to build the housing. Here's the cash, construct the building, make beautiful units, make it accessible, make it include the latest in aging design features, and have space for community events, for services, etc. So we need the cash, right? We just want to build the housing, and that's with the straightest line between the funding source and the actual development. And second, and this is a big ticket item, is that ongoing funding for long-term operating subsidies. These are the funds that bridge the gap between residents can afford. This is about, as we said in the US, we think of that as about 30% of whatever that renter's income is, and what it actually costs to operate quality housing, with a service coordinator or 2, depending on the size of the building and how many residences are in there. And research is telling us, ideally with a part-time wellness nurse. who can help connect residents between the service coordinators or wellness nurse with the services they need to age and community for as long as they want to, for as long as they need to. And of course, these are developments where services are 100% voluntary, where resident housing leases are completely separate and apart from the services they may or may not choose to participate in. And the goal here in my mind is where aging with choice is the #1 focus. Because when you're poor, your choices come down to very, very few. And I also want to speak to a little bit about some of, one of another issues because of the competing injustices we have is our silo problem. In the United States, we do tend to have a silo issue where we pay for health out of this bucket of funds, we pay for housing out of this bucket of funds, and it is very difficult sometimes to impress upon someone how investing in housing is going to result in savings on the health side, and therefore you should do that because one committee, one federal agency is going to be the ones paying for those investments. Say the housing agency is going to be paying for more housing. They're not reaping the benefits of that savings. The health agency is. And so that's always an issue, is the silo program here. And of course, as Laura has said, COVID has had a tremendous impact on older adults. With residents of federally subsidized senior housing being greatly impacted by COVID. And, owners and managers really quickly worked to insulate residents and staff from the virus with restrictions on visitors, new protocols for cleaning and disinfection, identifying new ways to access food and healthcare in buildings where most residents didn't have internet access in their own apartments. And during COVID, what we really saw is in the last administration, health department really step up and look at the promise and the beauty of affordable senior housing with helping address the health pandemic. And it was the health agency that pulled in more than 3,000 affordable senior housing communities and included those affordable senior housing communities in COVID vaccine clinics. So an amazing partnership and really brought on by the pandemic, but hopefully will have impacts lasting long afterwards. HUD's own research paper released earlier this year shows this overwhelming overlap between the demographics of people most at risk of COVID and residents who are in senior HUD subsidized housing, right? The oldest, the poorest, the unhealthiest, and the non-whitest. So next slide, please. So it really does make sense to think of affordable senior housing communities not just as apartment buildings, right? We really need to celebrate all the things that they are. And this slide is just a quick snapshot of one of our members' amenities that they list on their building. And you'll see here, a fitness center, a beauty shop, on-site resident service coordinators, and at the bottom there you'll see the golden ticket, right? If you are eligible for this program, your rent is based on 30% of your household income. So your housing is stable. You know what that means to someone who knows that if their income goes down for whatever reason, they're not going to lose their home, right? And so to be able to live in this kind of subsidized housing is just a precious, precious thing. Next slide, please. And real quick, I just want to say that, one thing that we look at with COVID is that not only did COVID bring in a partnership with the health department to do vaccines, but the health department, the U.S. Health Department, health agency stepped in and put in place an eviction moratorium. You have to understand how radical that is for the health department to come in and put in place an eviction moratorium for non-payment of rent so people would not be displaced during the pandemic. Next slide, please. I just want to end with a story here, and this is about a man I met a few years ago named Mark, who had recently moved into an apartment after living on the streets of DC for more than 10 years. And Mark said that if he had to pick one thing that he liked most about his apartment, it would be the light switch on this wall. He said that when he turned it on, he was no longer in the dark. And with that, I thank you for having me, and I look forward to the rest of this conference. I want to pass it over to Arlene.
Oh, Arlene, you'll just have to unmute your microphone there.
There we go. Okay, thank you, Linda, and good afternoon, everyone. That was a really inspiring presentation. I really found that I learned a lot about the American context, and I really admire your commitment to affordable seniors housing. So let me just call up my presentation here. Okay, so I'm pleased to be here today to talk about seniors affordable housing on behalf of Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC. So CMHC is Canada's national housing agency, and we work with partners from the community and all levels of government to create safe, accessible, and affordable housing. So today I'm going to give you a bit of background about CMHC. I'm going to talk about affordable housing in Canada and our national housing strategy, which has one of its key focuses on seniors. So in Canada, there's a whole range of housing for seniors along the housing continuum. And within this housing continuum, CMHC has a role to play in most of the areas, whether it's grants or loans to things like emergency shelters or affordable housing, all the way to mortgage loan insurance and market housing. But we're just one of the stakeholders in the overall housing continuum. And when it comes to affordable housing, and specifically seniors affordable housing in Canada, we've got the provinces, the territories, the municipalities, other federal agencies, private nonprofit sectors. They all play a really important role. So this slide and the next few slides I'm going to use to have set a bit of context for the housing market. So of course, like Linda, when we at CMHC talk about affordable housing, we say that it means that share shelter costs account for less than 30% of the before tax household income. When we talk about social housing or public housing, we see it as a subset of affordable housing. So it's rental housing that's subsidized by the government, and it's often developed in partnership with other agencies. And the idea is that it's available to those who would otherwise be unable to live in suitable or adequate housing. So let's turn the context to seniors. Of course, we know in Canada, senior 65 plus is the fastest growing age group in Canada. And it's projected to make up about a quarter of the population by 2041. To do a snapshot of now, according to the most recent census, about 25% are living below standards. Now that is including everything from affordable housing all the way to someone living in a home who just can't afford to maintain it properly. When we look at affordable or social housing, 1/5 of the residents are 65 plus, are seniors. And when we look at 65 plus, we know that at least 1/3 have some form of disability, and disability increases with age. So that could be vision loss, hearing loss, or physical disability. So what that means is when we're planning housing, we have to plan accordingly. And by planning that way, we open up housing to a wider range of people. So CMHC was founded in 1946, originally to house returning war veterans. And at the time, its mandate was to help improve housing and living conditions in Canada. And 75 years later, the mandate's fairly similar. We help Canadians meet their housing need. So we know that we've got a big housing affordability challenge. And so we created, a couple of years ago, we created an aspiration, and that's by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and meets their needs. Now, we know that's a really big stretch goal, but it's our guiding star, and it helps us decide how we're going to work and just try to innovate and create more affordable housing. To support that, we have our National Housing Strategy that was launched in 2017. And it has a strengthened focus on activities that can support housing affordability. So as I said, our National Housing Strategy was launched in 2017. It's a $70 billion program, and that's going to run for 10 years. And the idea being that it'll have a strengthened focus on the economy and economic growth, but more importantly, it'll give more Canadians a place to call home. We know that there's 1.7 million families in Canada that are in need of affordable housing. So it's really important that we have this increased focus. There were 3 guiding principles that came, that were sort of the basis for the National Housing Strategy. One is people. So we want to focus on the most vulnerable Canadians. So seniors being one key audience, but also youth, veterans, Indigenous persons, people with disabilities. From a community perspective, I know that Linda talked about social inclusion. That's a really important part of what we want to do with these communities. We want to make sure that we develop housing that's inclusive and that is accessible and is a leader in the next generation of housing. So you'll see as I talk about some of the projects that we include accessibility and energy efficiency features in this, because we want this to be lower cost to operate and more accessible to a wider range of people. And finally, the programs were developed to encourage partnerships because we can't do this alone. So we want to work with people from the public and private sector, from academia, really from all parts of Canada to try to partner to make these initiatives move forward. So as I said, the National Housing Strategy is it's a $70 billion program, but it's a toolkit. It's more than just one program or another. There's a whole range of things dealing with housing rights as a human right, housing benefits. I'm going to focus more on some of the funding for building and renovating affordable housing today, and also talk about some of our research programs. So when we look at our housing prioritization criteria, now this is the criteria that we use for people who are applying for funds to build or renovate affordable housing. We have minimum criteria, and that's because we want to make sure that there's social outcomes built into every new development. So of course, the project has to be built for the intended residents, and it has to be financially viable. A minimum of 5 affordable units or beds, because we want to increase the amount of affordable housing. From an affordability perspective, depending on the program, there's a degree, a percentage of the building that has to be affordable, and there's a duration up to 25 years. We look at access to transit and amenities. We want to make sure that what we're building is going to be able to be, people who live there are going to be able to be part of the community, access services, access stores. And I know it says access to transit there, but we also recognize that there are some areas that don't have that. So we do account for that. And finally, we look at energy efficiency and accessibility. Again, various percentages depending on the project, but the idea being that we're going to build really good housing that's energy efficient, low in cost to operate, that's healthy, and if we build it accessible, it's good for everyone. So here's an example of one project in Tillsonburg, Ontario, and it was built under our rental construction financing initiative. This initiative was meant to increase the number of standard rental apartments. So this isn't student housing, it's really for rental apartment buildings. I chose this one because it really is geared towards older adults, but it's not a supportive housing project. So it's 16 units that were built. All of them are affordable. All of them are accessible, with 13 of the 16 being adaptable. And it's a net zero building, which means it generates as much energy as it consumes. So it's built to passive house standard, very high building standards, and it's got photovoltaic cells on top of it. This was a partnership between the town of Tillsonburg Nonprofit Housing, Oxford County, and they really made a great project. One thing I wanted to mention in terms of the rental construction financing, it traditionally has been done for building new buildings. And so this is actually one of the smaller projects. But in the most recent budget, they talked about converting commercial spaces into housing because they recognize there's been changes with COVID. And also we want to rapidly build more housing. The next project I'm going to show you is in Atikokan, also in Ontario, but northwestern Ontario, and is through our National Housing Co-Investment Fund. And this is a combination of low interest loans and financial contributions. And the idea behind this fund was that this would be sort of money to help attract more partnerships to a project. In this case, we worked with Atikokan Community Living, who wanted to develop seniors housing. And part of the challenge for Atikokan was that if you were a senior there and you needed supportive housing, you had to go to Thunder Bay, which is 200 kilometers away. So this allows people to stay in their communities. So the town of Atikokan, they donated the land, they waived development fees, and they reduced the property taxes for the first years. So there's 38 units of affordable housing that have been created in this project. And then finally, one of our most recent initiatives is the Rapid Housing Initiative. We recognize that with COVID, there's such a pressure on housing and the need to develop rapid housing for people who are homeless and people who are vulnerable. So the government announced $1 billion towards rapid housing. So that's housing that's put together within 12 months. And we've seen so much interest in it. The first round, we were looking to get 3,000 new homes built. We got 4,700 through the proposals. 500 million went to municipalities who are in the greatest need of developing this, and then 500 million was put to tender for projects. And we received some great opportunities, everything from modular to housing where we're converting apartments or new builds that are rapid, or even hotels. You can see this one in BC that's been bought up. And then in the most recent budget, there's been another bit of funding announced for the Rapid Housing Initiative, hoping to create 4,500 more homes. I don't know how that's going to play out. It's just been announced. And like Linda said, in government, it takes a while to get things done. So hopefully we'll hear something soon. When we talk about forward thinking, one of the research programs under the National Housing Strategy is our Solution Labs program. I always describe this as sort of a think tank. So if someone has an idea that can advance affordable housing, then they can apply to get Solution Labs funding. And so this one was actually out of Vancouver, and it was creating stability for seniors who rent using a community-based approach. And the idea behind this was they brought people, seniors who were renting, along with landlord associations, the province, social services group, and they all worked together to come up with best practices and to look at things like how to overcome policy barriers and problems with evictions. And so it's been very good, and it's one of many solution labs that are focused on seniors. We also have our Planning and Research Fund, which I know Christine Shepard has been part of one of those projects, an age-inclusive approach to housing for older vulnerable adults. We also have an innovation fund, a demonstration lab, and I'll show you where to get more information about these. But I thought I'd highlight another fund today, which is our Housing Supply Challenge. So we know that there are barriers to developing affordable housing. So the government has allocated up to $300 million in funding over 5 years to do several rounds of thinking. So we're calling on people, whether it's teams of experts, whether it's schools, it could be for-profit, non-for-profit groups, to come together and think around different issues around housing. So we've already got a challenge underway, which is around data-driven technology. But launching next month, we've got one about pre-development processes. So what'll happen is people apply for this with an idea for how to move through some of these issues. And if they're successful, they'll be shortlisted and given money to help prototype or research this project. And then there'll be applicants from all the rounds that are selected to actually implement this. So we're hoping by this sort of project that we can sort of fast track some really good thinking. We're also going to look at northern housing, construction technology, scaling solutions, and public perception of new housing development, because we know these can be impediments to developing affordable housing. So one of the other things that we do is on our research side, we develop resources to help people either in the housing industry or seniors themselves. There's the Housing for Older Canadians publication. This is, the initial one was done a number of years ago, and it's gone through several iterations. In the last year, we've republished Housing for Older Canadians, and it's written by Glenn Miller and Ed Starr, who the Torontonians and Canadians will probably be familiar with them. They do a lot of work in this area. And there's 2 volumes to them. These one is understanding the housing market. And what they do is they look at census data and they look at trends in seniors housing. It was originally developed for people who are developing affordable housing, but we're finding that there's lots of uses for people who work in social services or municipalities to understand what's going on with the Canadian housing market. And then the developing the project piece looks at different housing types and how to develop an affordable housing project. I'm just going to talk about 2 more publications that we did with March of Dimes. One is Maintaining Seniors' Independence Through Home Adaptations. This and the other publications I've talked about are all available on our website for free. So this is a step-by-step guide for seniors or caregivers to walk through a home and to look at what kind of accessibility needs they have, and we offer solutions. So it's a good way to get someone to start thinking about home adaptations. Another project we did was around no-cost or low-cost home modifications. And this was a recognition of the fact that a lot of the work that we were doing at CMHC talked about renovations or really expensive things. And so we worked with the home and vehicle modification people from March of Dimes to create solutions under $100. So this way people can start on the road to home modifications. So that was just a way to give you a little overview of what we do at CMHC. If you want to find out more information about the funds or the research funds, you can look at our National Housing Strategy website at placetocallhome.ca. If you're interested in our resources, you can go to our website at cmhc.ca. So here's my contact information. Please feel free to connect with me directly, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Arlene, and thank you, Linda. Those were both excellent presentations. And I've been monitoring the chat and all the questions coming through, so you've definitely both have stimulated a lot of interest in both your topics. I'm going to ask maybe if Linda can join us as well. We do have some time for questions for the both of you, and I'll try and give some questions to Linda and some questions to Arlene, and hopefully see what else, what other interesting discussion comes up. So one of the questions that came up for you, Linda, is what is the data source for the renter-homeowner disparity data that you talked about? And you're on mute, Linda.
Hi there, Linda. Hopefully you can hear us. You should just have to press the mic on button. There you are.
Sorry about that. I have to double check, Sandra, but I believe those data are from the Urban Institute, which is a think tank here in DC.
Okay, great, thank you.
And, you know, they go up and down a little bit here and there, but there is, you know, it seems like there always has been a pretty consistent, you know, 30% gap or so between Black and white home ownership in the U.S.
Okay, thank you. Arlene, one of the questions that came through was, has COVID-19 impacted the timelines for the National Housing Strategy?
Well, the National Housing Strategy itself has set guidelines because there's budgets that's allocated for every year on that. But what it has done has has really, I guess the Rapid Housing Initiative would be the best response I would have to the timeline piece. We introduced that with that 12-month timeline to try to encourage more development of rapid housing. So that would be the main one. And I think the government's response in the most recent budget to some of the programs, sort of allocating some of the funding to things like commercial properties or putting more money in things like rapid housing. Those are the main impacts that we've seen from COVID in terms of government action.
And I saw through one of the chats, Linda, you talked about how you define rapid housing in the U.S. compared to what it is in Canada. So it's interesting to see those cross-national perspectives in terms of how important terminology is and how different it can be. Linda, another question that came up is, sorry, the chat just moved around a little bit. And actually, what are the next big opportunities to advance your goals to expand the supply of affordable senior housing in the state?
Well, great question. There's a really large opportunity this year. Folks know that we have a new president, right? We have a Democrat in the White House. We have a Democrat-led House of Representatives. And by the slimmest of majorities, one vote, we have a Democrat-led Senate. And there is quite a bit of talk and movement and action and discussion, draft bills, and possibilities around having, as part of a large infrastructure bill, that the Democrats want to pass a significant housing section of that with really the most resources we've seen in decades go to expanding the supply of affordable housing, including funds to build new housing through our flagship senior housing program. So, I mean, the next best opportunity is upon us, and we are busy. We are trying to be the squeaky wheel there to get this done this year. It would be amazing.
Okay, wonderful. And I see some questions, and I'm not sure who they're exactly directed to, but there's questions about preventing poverty in old age and advocacy goals around seniors homelessness. So I don't know, Arlene, if there's any thoughts from your perspective from CMHC, and then maybe Linda, what your goals are to address these issues, because they both obviously are linked together.
Sorry, you're saying the advocacy. Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm saying two questions about advocacy goals in relation to addressing seniors homelessness and what's being done to prevent poverty in old age. So if either or applies to some of the work that's being done by CMHC.
Well, I just think a lot of the work that we're doing, really, we're the National Housing Agency, so what we're trying to do is make sure that people have a place that they can call home. So really a lot of the work we're doing really is more around making sure people are housed, making sure we have projects to house people who are homeless and people along the housing continuum. I'd say the advocacy question is probably more appropriate for Linda.
Okay. Linda?
So I'll say on homelessness, what we're doing to address seniors homelessness is to expand the supply of affordable housing, right? If people who are currently experiencing homelessness have one thing in common, it's the lack of housing. And so this housing first approach, where regardless of what your other needs may be, let's get you in a stable place that you can afford to be in for as long as you need to be there. And if that's forever, then that's just fine. And so expanding the supply of affordable housing is really, really important. And for homeowners, that might mean supports to help them pay their mortgage or their property taxes so that they can stay in their homeowner home, or if they're a renter, to pay the rent. And then preventing poverty, the best way to prevent poverty in old age is not to be poor before you become a senior. And as a houser, I work on the housing solution, but I think a lot of us could have just as easily been income support people, right? Like how does the job market pay enough so that people can earn enough to pay a reasonable amount for their housing and have enough left over to save so that they have enough in retirement. Certainly increasing in the United States, the amount of Social Security people get, after they, reach 62 or 65 or 72 or whatever age they decide to start taking Social Security. So, increasing people's incomes or expanding the income supports, not only through things like Social Security, but also through housing subsidies, through food subsidies, and making sure the healthcare side of the programs are adequate to really meet the needs and give people choice they need.
Wonderful. We have time for one more question, which I'm going to direct to you, Arlene. And being a researcher, I'm always interested to see how the funders work. How does CMHC decide how to prioritize the research needs within their funding calls?
Oh, well, usually what happens is, in terms of the research needs, there's a whole other presentation around the research piece. So you'll see that there's, I guess depending, with the National Housing Strategy funding, we're looking at funding that reaches the most vulnerable, so that you're going to make a difference to the different vulnerable areas. So seniors, Indigenous housing, those sorts of groups. But so they'll prioritize by that. In other, that's why I'm sort of stumbling a little bit. So it depends on the research program. So I can share that research information on the website. I know I shared some stuff with Christine, including the links, but it really depends on the program. But any funding under the National Housing Strategy, you're looking at affordable housing and affordable housing for our key audiences.
Wonderful, thank you. So at this point, I know there's a lot of questions in the chat, and hopefully Arlene and Linda, you'll be around, to see other sessions and hopefully network. And maybe you can answer some of the questions in the chat or connect with people directly. At this point, again, we're very grateful that you were both able to present today. Really great to hear both perspectives. So just a reminder that if we get speaker permission, slides and materials will be made available on the conference website, hopefully 1 week following the conference. We're now going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to start up again at 1:30 Eastern Daylight Time. So, stretch your legs, grab a snack, or hopefully can join us at the tables to network. So again, let's give Arlene and Linda a round of virtual applause, and we look forward to seeing the concurrent sessions start at 1:30. Thank you, everybody.